Hey everyone, welcome as you're coming in. We'll give folks a minute or so to get in here with us. If you want, while you're entering, if you want to drop in the chat where you're joining us from, which affiliate you are, and that would be great. Random thing, I see we've got somebody here from Arizona. I just found out today that my son got into Arizona State University, so that was pretty exciting. That's just a little random thing. And I'm originally from Kansas, so welcome to our Kansas folks. Welcome to everybody, but just a couple fun little state things today. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. Nice. Very exciting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Feel free to keep throwing your organization there in the chat. Throw in any questions that you have. I'll try to keep an eye on that. But I'm just really glad everybody could join today. I actually posed this idea to Valerie. Many of you probably know Valerie on our staff a little while ago, just trying to offer some more resources to our affiliates. I know we have all different size affiliates. We have some who may have a dedicated web person. We have others who, somebody else in the org is also running the website and social and everything else. And so just wanted to provide some resources. And one thing I also want to do with this is open up my line of communication. If you all ever have questions about your website or about the main MHA website, you can always reach out to me. So feel free to email me. I'm just kabell@mhanational.org. So you can always reach out to me. So with that, I should introduce myself probably. I am Kristen Abel. I'm our Director of Website and Digital Projects at the MHA National Office. I've got a lot of years in website, more years than I probably need to share. But I've been working a website for a while, and specifically with website accessibility for about the past 10 years or so. I used to work in higher education and did a lot of website work there, and accessibility is a huge thing for higher ed websites. And really it's become a huge thing for everybody as we've gotten to know a little bit more about it. So again, I'm working on some certifications around accessibility. I don't quite have them yet, but I've been doing a lot of trainings and studying for those. So if you ever have questions about that or just general website stuff, feel free to reach out. So today we're just going to talk about Web Accessibility 101. So this is pretty basic level stuff. I'm not going to get into a lot of the back-end development or coding things today. If you're looking for more of that, I can share some additional resources with you. But we're just going to talk about some kind of front end things, some easy things that you can do to make your website more accessible for all users. I always like to start a little bit with why accessibility is important for our websites. Of course, first things first, it's federal law. And many of you may know this already, but just in case you don't, I've shared a few different pieces of that. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the WCAG, which is a super fun word to say, WCAG. Actually, 2.1 was published in 2018. 2.2 just came out, so it's not quite required yet as law, but it is something that if you are working on accessibility, you should probably take a look at, because it will become law as it's out there for a little bit longer. Websites need to meet AA level compliance. So there's 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. A is really, really base level stuff. We are at AA. Everybody needs to be meeting AA. I will tell you the MHA main website doesn't quite meet AA across everything. We are getting ready to redesign our site, and that will be one of the primary focuses of that. And so that is something that we're looking at. Typically with AAA compliance, the challenges there is that becomes much more like accommodation heavy. So it can be really great for people with very specific needs, but then it doesn't branch out across for other folks. It doesn't kind of bridge that gap. So AAA compliance isn't necessarily something that we're probably ever going to see that we are required to meet. But it's good to know what it is, and it's good to make those accommodations where it makes sense and makes the site more user-friendly for everybody. So law is a big reason of why accessibility is important. But also we're not bad people. We're in the field of mental health, and we definitely want to make sure that folks have access to our resources. That's why we're here. So that's probably why you're here, because accessibility is important to you as well. So I do just want to reference a little bit of the accessibility work that happens behind the scenes, and we will be sharing out these slides later. So these links, you can follow those and take a look at those sorts of things as we go through. But a lot of accessibility work does happen behind the scenes. So, but it happens a lot of times as part of a design process or a development process. And so if you're involved in that for your organization, having some knowledge of what folks need to do can be important, even if you don't know how to do that thing. So color and design are a big piece of this. Color, there is a accessible color ratio for folks with color blindness. So being able to know what that is, that's been a large part of the work that I've been doing on the MHA website in the year and a half that I've been here, is starting to go back and like address old issues with color. We recently worked with a firm to help us build a more accessible color palette. And so we're working on that to like implement some of that throughout the site. There's a lot of special tags. I don't know if you've ever heard of ARIA coding that you can do on the back end to identify a role or the purpose of a certain element on a page. So if you ever hear of ARIA labels, that's typically for assistive technology. So things like screen readers. And then a lot of base level coding HTML is meant to work with keyboard navigation as well as navigation with a mouse. But sometimes there's some additional things that folks can do, or there's things that folks can do that can break the original HTML coding that sets that up. So again, just knowing about that stuff can be really helpful. So that as you're working with, if you're working with a vendor that's developing your site, or you're the person developing your site, either way, like that you have some knowledge of that when you're working on that. So one of the key things about accessibility, and a lot of times people don't always think about the actual content that they're putting on their site as needing to be accessible, but readability is accessibility. And so I really try to emphasize that. Obviously, the more readable your content, the more accessible it is. The other thing that I really try to emphasize, and this is something that, again, we're working on with our national website, the less content you have, the easier it is to make your whole website accessible. The more content you have, I mean, trying to apply accessibility to thousands of pages is incredibly difficult. And so that's one of our big hopes with our redesign too, is to reduce our content and make it a little bit more easy to navigate and more accessible overall. Lower reading levels make all content more accessible, no matter who your audience is. A lot of times when we're working with other folks at our organization, they want us to write for one audience or another. I usually try to choose the audience that is the least knowledgeable. So for us, that's those people with lived experience. They are often the least knowledgeable, as opposed to advocates, lawmakers, even donors sometimes. And I go with them because then we are much more likely to do things like spell out acronyms the first time we use them, or explain or define complicated terminology. We have a lot of very specific terminology around mental health. And so taking the time to explain that in language that is much simpler can be really good. Some sites say you should write to a 9th grade level. I like to aim for a 6th to 9th grade level whenever possible, because that reaches a very broad audience. One, we know that there are youth looking at our resources. We know that there are people who may struggle with reading. There are people who English is a second language. So the lower you make that and the simpler you make that, the easier it is for folks to digest. Again, I came from higher education, and I often had faculty who would be like, well, but we want our students to be able to read things at a higher level. And I'm like, that's great. Totally feel you on that. But even you as a PhD professor, how easy is it for you to read on a screen? And most would say it's actually really difficult. Reading on the screen is not kind of where most of us learned how to read. It's not our natural reading style. Sometimes we're reading on our phones, and like having to read really long, dense text on a phone can be really difficult. So the easier, the simpler you make it, the better for everybody. Scannability is queen in web. I always say queen instead of king. That's just my approach to it. But scannability is queen in web. It's really important for people to be able to easily scan. I'm going to go over a couple different ways people tend to scan on websites. You may have heard of this, you may have not. Again, just feel free to throw questions in the chat if I'm moving too quickly through anything, or you have questions about anything I'm saying. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a traditional F pattern. So this is a pretty common heat map on a lot of different sites. This looks like a Google heat map that I'm looking at. I pulled this image from somewhere, but that does look very similar to a Google heat map. So typically people read in an F pattern. They might read across the full first line, then they're just going to scan down the left side of the page until like a heading pulls them out, or until something, draws them out. As much as possible, using subheadings to draw readers' eyes across the page is going to be helpful for you. Headings in general have a lot of use for accessibility. This is also really useful for screen readers. So if there are not a lot of headings on the page, that screen reader is going to read all of that text on that page to somebody. If there are headings, somebody can easily scan the headings, find the content that is relevant to them, and just have their screen reader read that. You can imagine how much more satisfying an experience that is for somebody who is using a screen reader or other types of assistive technology, rather than having to listen to a whole page where only part of that content may be relevant to them. Where possible, using bulleted or numbered lists is a great idea. Think about yourself and how you scan pages, and how much easier or how much more likely you are to read a bulleted list than a long paragraph chunk of text. I mentioned at the beginning of this that my son was accepted to Arizona State University. He got the email. It had several paragraphs of text. He did not even know he was admitted because he didn't bother to read it and couldn't scan it easily. He found out because I read the email. So I think that's pretty typical of a lot of youth and generally how people interact with on-screen content. And so thinking about how we chunk that text out into bullets can be really important. And then just in general, using less text. Folks are scanning, they're not They're not really reading that content they are scanning. So whenever possible, cut it. I like when I can, I try to cut text almost all the time by like half. That's not always possible. Maybe I've only got like 2 paragraphs. I'm not going to cut that by half, but like even cutting those paragraphs down to smaller paragraphs, chunking it out a little bit more, adding an intro text at the top of your page that gives readers an idea, gives web users in general an idea of what they're getting in on that page is going to help them use your website a lot easier. So I mentioned headings and how that can be really important for assistive technology. It's also really important that you use them in the proper order. A lot of times we have a developer or designer create a heading structure for us, and then we apply it by how the headings look, not necessarily what the best structure is. So if we don't like the size of the heading 2, if the heading 2 is too big, like I'll find even now on a lot of our MHA national pages that there's a heading 3 is applied throughout the page because whoever built the page liked the look of that one better than the heading 2. But it's really important that you apply them in order because that is how the screen reader is going to read through them. And it can be really confusing to somebody who isn't looking at it, but is just listening to it, to have them out of order. I've put kind of an order here for folks so you can see. So only one heading 1 per page. That's just a general practice. Your heading 1 is your page title, and every page should have a page title. Really important. That page title can be styled however you want it to be styled. It can be text over an image or whatever. It can look really nice, but you need to have that heading 1 on that page. Other headings you can do, however, you can do heading 2, and then maybe a subheading of that is heading 3, and a subheading of that is heading 4, and then you go back to heading 2 because now we're back at the top level heading, top level topic again. So, but again, you wouldn't go heading 2, heading 4, or heading 3, heading 1, heading 3, heading 2. The next heading on your page after that heading 1 should be a heading 2 every time. Great. So there's another type of page, and that's a page that's more of a landing page or a page that you've got like a really important call to action. In those cases, typically people will read in a Z pattern. And I've given you an example here. So a lot less text on these pages. There's really only one to do for folks. They can kind of scan that where it says some information. They can kind of just scan that. Really what you're trying to do is make sure that they see the links at the top and your call to action at the bottom. So that's another sample reading pattern that we see sometimes. That might be used for something like a toolkit sign up or some sort of resource sign up or sign up for a webinar. We might do a page like that this way. So this is just one other example of how to use, again, much less text, but to get people to the content that you need them to see. One of our biggest offenders across all websites, not just MHA National, but like across every website I've ever clicked on, I think. People use so much text on images, and they do this because it can be much easier to do styled text or make the text positioned the place that you want it on an image than it is to do it as live text. And live text is when it's part of the site. It's like paragraph text or it has a heading applied to it or whatever. It's not part of the image. The problem with this is that assistive technology and screen readers cannot read images. All they will tell the user there is there's an image here. That's all that a user gets from this. So imagine we have this really great looking infographic, which we've got a lot of these on our site. What the user gets is image. Well, that doesn't translate any of that great information that we have, right? So I really have encouraged folks to get away from using so much text on images. A little bit of text on images is fine. And if it's just like repetitive text or something that's decorative, absolutely fine. Where we have text on images, we need to have the appropriate alternative text or alt text. So the challenge with that is you're often limited on how much alt text you can put with an image. So on an infographic like this, I would run out of space really. It would be really difficult, one, to separate out the different pieces, right? And then two, I would run out of room with alt text. I would run out of space to put all that in there. It would be much better, for an example like this, to have a graphic that looks like that map of the US, and then in live text next to it, write out 41.8% of the US population are people of color, etc. That's a much better way to build something like this on your website. Makes it much more user-friendly. And it's really, honestly, that's more mobile-friendly too, because what happens to an image on mobile is it just shrinks. So we have this great big text here, and it's easy to see on a desktop. And then the minute it's on mobile, it's all shrunk. And that's only taking up half of your mobile screen, right? So if even that. So that 41.8% of the US population is suddenly super, super tiny. So it's really better practice for a number of reasons, not least accessibility, but also mobile friendliness as well. And we know that a large number of our users are accessing our sites on mobile. So when possible, definitely use graphics with text. Just a note, I know that like social media, it's become very common to use a lot of text on social media images. That's fine, as long as you put that text in an alternative text field, which Instagram has on the back end, Facebook has as availability. Instagram, it's under advanced settings, and then Facebook, when you go to edit the image, a lot of times it will, they've got some AI in place that pulls what they think is the alt text. You may have to correct that, but that's important as well. It's also important just in general to add alt text to images. So I'll talk about that in just a second. Here's another example of where alt text can be really problematic. Images as links. So we had this, I think I've changed it now, but we had this image on our site, and I saw it and I was like, is that a link? Is that an image? I don't know what that is. Again, what a screen reader is getting is image. It may or may not share that that's a link. And it won't tell you what the link is, right? Like, because there's no text associated with the link. So it's really important that rather than doing something like this, that you do a button, or if you do use an image as a link. So what I do a lot of times is if we are using an image with text and buttons beneath it, the button will be a link. The image will also be a link, because sometimes people just click on that image, but the button is really the main link, right? And so they're both going to the same place. The button is your call to action, but I know that how people use the web, and especially with mobile, like they might just accidentally click the picture instead of the button. Probably your best bet is to make the whole thing image, text, and button, but your link. Our site isn't quite that. We have a Drupal site. It's not quite that flexible. I'm hoping our new site is, but that's just something that you want to think about, and you want to provide context for what they're clicking on with your links. So avoiding images as the only link, or if you have an image as a link, making sure that you provide some alt text that says where that person is going. So here it might be your alt text would describe your picture, that there's two people here smiling, and read more success stories or, get more success stories, might be your alt text. Tables are fascinating. So for those of you who have been in websites as long as I have, you may know that our first websites were built only as tables, like they were a table, and email is still built in tables. And I find it incredibly difficult to build emails because of that. We've moved away from that. Tables can be really complicated for a number of reasons, not least because they aren't always responsive unless you put the proper coding in there. One thing that I like to do with a table is ask you to, put your hand together, like, so you have a hole that's like the width of a straw, like just a drinking straw, and then try to read this table, so like, if you're trying to read the table through that straw, that's how some people's vision works, right? That they have very limited vision. That means that it can be really hard to track that information across, right? Like okay, 11 a.m. our opening and welcome remarks. Okay, what day, what is this? This is the speaker. Okay, I got to go back up to speaker. I got to, so you trying to track all that information at a table with that limited vision can be really challenging and frustrating for users with that. That being said, I want to acknowledge that there's times where some information just has to be presented in a table. Data is one of those things. That's totally fine. You can totally present data in a table. You just need to make sure you use things like table heads, identify what your table heads are. That's going to allow, again, that assistive technology to guide the user through that. I mean, sometimes I get a table and I'm like, I can think of no other way to put this out there but a table. So I get that. But when we use a table just strictly for formatting purposes, which is what we're doing here, this is an agenda. This is one way to present an agenda. There's other ways to present agendas. We've presented this because the person that put this together reads across very easily. That's an easy thing for them. What I did was say, hey, what are some other ways we can do this, right? Like, what are some other ways we can present this information? So using color and headings is a really useful way of presenting things like agendas. So here, the Tuesday, August 2nd, Tuesday, August 2nd is your H2, your heading 2, 8 to 9 a.m. is your H3. So somebody who's using assistive technology could be like, I'm not going to be there for the 8 to 9. What is the 9 session? So they can skip over that and go to the 9 a.m. session, right? That's just an easier way. And as somebody with sight, I can easily scan this and the color makes it pop out for me that I can, easily look at that. Or even if I'm colorblind, the boldness of the headings makes it easy to scan. So thinking about how you can present information in different ways can be really helpful to pull people out of those tables. Directional text can also be problematic for folks with low vision or no vision. So remember the straw I was just telling you about? Like, if you tell somebody, go to the right-hand side of the page, well, or look at your left-hand nav. One, if they're on mobile, that may not be where that shows up. They may be using, again, assistive technology, and their direction is meaningless to them there. So yeah, I mean, being a little bit more clear, so avoiding terminology like to the left, below, or above, using the title instead. Like in the section titled, mental health resources, you will find XYZ, or find more resources in the, in the section titled mental health resources. Finding ways to explain to people where it is on the page if they need to go someplace else on the page or on your site, using titles or text can be a lot more useful and user friendly for folks with who are accessing your site through different technology, through whether it be mobile or through a screen reader or something else. So thinking about how you do that can be really important. I still get a lot of articles, folks share articles with me that are like, oh, you can find this information below. And I always edit that out. I always say you can find this information in the section titled this, or in the next section, you can find XYZ. Those sorts of things. I try to make it a little bit more clear for folks. This is one of the ones that can be hard for people to shift away from, because again, as sighted people, it's very clear to us where to go on a page. Also avoiding similar link text. So this is one of the pages on our site that I recently, a few months ago, redid. We do this a lot with blogs, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but we're learn more, learn more, learn more. So as a screen reader, what I'm getting is follow this link to learn more. Follow this link to learn more. Follow this link to learn more. Now I have 3 links. They all tell me to learn more. They don't tell me to learn more about what. So it can be really confusing. And also, even just for folks scanning it quickly, having more descriptive text is much more helpful. So I updated these to find care. That's really what people are trying to do here, is find care, learn about intersecting identities, see our coming out guides. The more descriptive you can get with your link text, the more likely, 1, somebody's going to follow it, and 2, the more likely they're going to get to accurate information and not have to back out and get frustrated with their site. So whenever possible, like making your link text more descriptive is better. Also, this is one of the pages on our site that I haven't updated yet, and it's like been on my list forever. So this is our quick facts and statistics about mental health, and we have source with a link to something after every stat here, which again doesn't tell me anything about what the link looks like that I'm going to. Whereas if I had linked something like 1 in 5 American adults, or I'd linked, diagnosable mental health condition, that gives the person a little bit more information about the type of resource that they are going to encounter there. So just linking your text instead of adding an additional link after that's like, see source here or see reference here, or just source or reference, is going to be way more helpful for folks. You want to be careful, and I see this a lot too when I get things. So like people will say studies show the number of US adults with mental illness is 50 million, right? And somebody will link studies. Well, if they're quoting or if they're writing an article where they quote multiple studies might be, or a study, that could be any of the studies that they've quoted on that page. It could be that they link the word study multiple times on that page. So it's much more helpful to link, 50 million US adults experience mental illness. Like that's a much better part of that sentence to link than this study showed that 50 million adults. This study, it's much better to link the 50 million part than the other. Also, just avoiding text like click here or even just here for links, although we do that sometimes with, I think, our media releases, our press releases. And I think that's standard practice for those. But click here. I'm a big fan of avoiding click here because when you're on a phone, you don't really click, right? You tap. So even that language, it feels a little bit dated to me when I see click here. Although I do know that for social media, it's kind of come back around and a lot of social media is using that again. But typically on a website, I would avoid things like click here or just here for links and make the text as descriptive as possible. It just allows your users with assistive technology a little bit more insight into what they are about to click. PDFs. Oh, PDFs. I can't stand PDFs for a number of reasons. That being said, I know that a lot of times we need PDFs, and you can make them accessible. One thing I do just want to mention is that PDFs aren't helpful for SEO either. So, like the text, if it's a PDF that can be a web page, make it a web page every time. Choose to make it a web page, because that can really help with your SEO. That being said, sometimes you have to have a PDF, and I get that. You can make it more accessible. Just a few little tips here. And there's a lot of, like, if you Google like make PDF accessible, there's tools out there that have checklists. There's tools where you can actually submit your PDF and it will tell you what you need to do to make it accessible. Highly recommend using those. I've been working with one of our folks that does some design work here at the national office on that. When she's not ready to be done with me, she'll work on making all of our PDF. We've been working on this. We do offer PDFs with our toolkits a lot, because we know people like to print those out. And so really trying to make those as accessible as possible is important. So the things that you can do: don't use images with text when possible. Again, that's just similar to web. It's the same sort of thing. It's difficult for things to read that. Use alt text. You can apply alt text in PDFs. You can apply it in most tools, and Word, for example, and Adobe have tools that allow you to make your stuff more accessible. They have accessibility tools to look at. Headers, using headers in PDFs. Oh, it's so important. Same thing as with, a website. Screen readers read these very similarly. So it's really important to use those headers and I don't want to say you want to use a header every paragraph. That's not what I'm trying to say, but like, use them. Don't just have a PDF with one header on it. Use them throughout to section out your content and organize it for folks. Use that appropriate color contrast. And there's tools that are available. I think at the end of this, I have some different resources. But if there's ever a tool that you're like, I wish there was a tool for this, I wonder if Kristen knows if there's a tool for this, feel free to email me, because a lot of times I know that there is a tool, or I've heard of a tool, and I can find that for you. And then there's a tagging structure that you can use with PDFs to, tag a section. It just helps, again, that assistive technology know what order to read that PDF in, how to read it, and how it allows that person to skip through pieces of it as well. So you can make PDFs accessible. When possible, make a PDF a web page, but when not possible, make sure that you're doing what you can to still make those accessible. So I left a little time at the end for any questions that people want to send in through the chat. But also just wanted to share some of my favorite resources. The WCAG overview, again, like I said, 2.2 just came out recently, but 2.1 is the important one to know for now for legal reasons. 2.2 is where to work towards. So looking at WCAG, it can be a little dense and difficult to translate sometimes. Like sometimes even I read it and I'm like, what in the world does that mean? There's a lot of resources out there that help kind of translate that. So looking for WCAG checklists, if you Google that, can help you find a simpler breakdown, an easier breakdown. There is the IAAP, which is like the International Association for Accessibility Professionals. I think I got that right. I'm not entirely sure. I know the initials are right, or the acronym is right. They have a really good checklist for accessibility for WCAG that you can use. That's also who provides the certifications for the different levels. There's two different certifications. One is Certified Professional Accessibility, CPAC, and then the other one is for web developers. So if you're looking for learning in this area, the CPAC certification is a really good one to look at, and the IAP has tons of great like trainings and resources. They've got a newsletter that they send out and all sorts of stuff. So accessible colors, the link here that I use this, I won't say daily, but almost, like I use it a lot. And I use it for things like when I do set a background for a certain area to make sure that our text is accessible on it. When I'm doing a button, is the text contrast enough? Things like that. So I use it a lot. Also, it's just kind of fun to like play with, and it'll tell you things like use this font size instead of this font size, or use this in bold, use this font size in bold. So it's just kind of a fun tool to play with. Creating accessible PDFs. So I do have one of those links here. This is the one that I shared with our person here at National. This is the Berkeley's accessible PDF resource. So on how to make accessible PDFs. And then I threw my brain on here, which is not linkable, but reachable by email. Again, that's KABELL@mhanational.org. So lots of good resources here, but I also am sharing more, or I have more in my brain that I didn't put on here because I could probably just give you a full PowerPoint that's just resources, and nobody needs that in their brain. So feel free to contact me if you have questions. Again, you know, one of my hopes for providing this resource is to open up lines of communication with our affiliates, and support you all how I can with your websites. I'm limited on staffing resources, but if there's any questions I can answer, or anything on the main site that you have questions about too, I'm happy to answer those and to help you out however I can. So I don't see any questions in our chat, which means I did a really great job and explained all your accessibility stuff today. Again, feel free to send me questions afterwards if you need to. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar, as well as the slides, a copy of the slides, to all of our affiliates. So feel free to take a look at that, or share with others that you know might find it beneficial. Again, also feel free to reach out to me individually if you've got questions or need some additional support. Jackie, I think, is here and will be able to close us out with this webinar. I can stay on for another minute or two too if people have questions that they want to ask. Somebody asked, would I mind reviewing some things from time to time? I'm happy to do that. Yeah, if it makes your website, if it helps to make your website more accessible or more user-friendly, or you just need another set of eyes, I'm happy to do that. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Again, I know that there's a broad spectrum of how much support you all have for your website. So if there's things I can do from the national office to help you, I want to be there for you. So I appreciate that. Yeah, we're excited for my son. So
Thank you so much, Kristen. If there's no more questions, thank you, everyone. We'll be sure to send out the recording, and I'm going to go ahead and close us out.
thanks, Jackie. And thanks everyone for coming.